Our speaker this morning is our own UUCJ member, Peter Racine. Many of us know about Peter's work in the community on behalf of the Jaguars. He has managed the Jaguars Foundation for 23 years. But you may not know that Peter also runs another foundation. 7 years ago, Peter and his wife, Kelly, founded the Center for Central American Empowerment. This foundation's mission is to empower women and girls, strengthen families, and promote male responsibility. In the past 6 years, the center has provided more than $1 million in grants to programs supporting women and girls in Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. Please join me in welcoming Peter to talk about his journey that led to this work and its impact in Central America.
Good morning. It's great to see everybody here today. And yes, I was up a little late last night for the game, but that's okay. It's good to be here and share a little bit about something that some of you know about, but others may not, and it's our work in Central America. When we think of Central America, what we hear a lot is, who cares? Who cares about Central America? Why would we care about Central America? And one of the first images that comes to our mind is the borders, with people crossing the borders. And of course, they don't just come from Central America, but many do come from Central America. And it's a profoundly tragic picture. We all remember not too long ago the tractor-trailer truck that was abandoned and killed dozens of people, including 2 sisters and 2 brothers. And that just speaks to the hardship of why people risk everything to leave where they're at and come to a new place. So the hymn today speaks to the desire to get to a new place, a safer place, a better place. And I chose that hymn with hope because it really is a journey that many people in Central America, particularly women and girls, take because of either violence, domestic violence, gang-related violence, extreme poverty, drought that has happened in the rural areas in those countries. And yes, are they looking for a better opportunity? Of course. But most people are leaving because they cannot be where they're at. So one of the ideas that we wanted to do was to think about how could we help these women and these girls and their families be safe, have stability, and have an economic chance to be able to stay in their own homes and communities. I first visited Guatemala when I was in my early 20s, and I went to study Spanish, and I fell in love with the country. At the time, I was a full-time volunteer with an organization called Covenant House, which works with homeless, runaway, abused, and neglected, and inner-city youth. I was developing my fluency in Spanish. Anybody that has grown up in a Puerto Rican area understands Spanglish, which basically is pásame el paper towel, a little bit of English, a little bit of Spanish. And I was working on getting a little bit more better Spanish. During the 80s, the conflict in Guatemala was a very difficult time for that country. There was a civil war going on, and the indigenous community, which makes up over half of the country, was caught in the middle of that conflict. And when I arrived, Covenant House had opened an orphanage, and it had 125 children in the orphanage. They spoke more than 20 different Mayan dialects. None of them came speaking English, but it was there that firsthand I had a chance to really see the impact that the war was having on the people. These children had lost their families, and I I saw a young boy whose hair had turned white from the impact of that at him. And I saw, of course, the physical injuries and emotional scars that all the children had. After returning to Houston, I met Kelly. Kelly, raise your hand. You saw Kelly earlier. And have taken orders ever since. And so Kelly joined the volunteer community in Houston. We were opening a shelter, but she previously worked as a homeschool teacher in Costa Rica for a pastor and his family. And we both, had a desire to move back to Central America, move to Latin America and work. So after I finished graduate school, we had the opportunity to go to Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Guatemala is a beautiful country. Honduras, not so much. And so the Bay Islands in Honduras, I'm sure, are very nice. We never actually got there, but it's a very poor country, and 80 to 90% of the people live in poverty. About 10% make up a small middle class, and about 1% make up the elite and the diplomatic community and others. So it's a very, very impoverished country. We were invited to have the opportunity to open up the Covenant House shelter there, and we ended up working there for more than 6 years. Our daughter Miriam, who's not here today, but was adopted from Honduras. She is Latin and Mayan by her ancestry, and so that was one thing we brought back after 6 years. But when we returned to the United States, we settled here in Jacksonville, which is where Kelly's family was. And we wanted to continue to support those programs, which we did. We brought friends and family down to Guatemala to visit and introduce them to the country and its people. Kelly does a trip where she translates for a medical doctor and a medical team every year. And we provided donations within our means. But our vision was to be able to start a foundation to have a greater impact. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually started a foundation. You need one thing. What do you think that is? Money, right? Yeah. Okay, so a wealthy friend of mine who has since passed, he told me, he goes, do you know what I do when I want to start something new? He goes, I write myself a check. All right, so I didn't exactly have the means to do that, so it took me a few more years. But I certainly relate and work around a lot of people with wealth. And so one of the people that I worked with was my former boss, Mrs. Weaver, when she and Wayne owned the team. And she became an enthusiastic supporter. And with other donors as well, we were able to do what we do in Central America. And, we did a number of over $1 million. That's a lot of money. In U.S. terms, that's about $10 million in value. So it was significant. But before we kind of go to the foundation, I want to talk a little bit about what we deal with in Central America. So the poverty in Central America is one extreme more than what we might experience here in the United States. Drug trafficking is a significant issue, and as you see when you read on the news, the drug traffickers do have a lot of control in different parts of the country. I visited a school a couple of years ago where the drug traffickers controlled the entrance and the exit to the neighborhood that we were visiting. And the drug people that were running that particular area, they wanted their younger siblings to be in school. They wanted them to be educated. And they wanted them to probably not fall in the lifestyle that they were in. So they're actually very supportive. And I went into school with a Catholic priest, but he had to stay. So when we were leaving the neighborhood, my friend and I were leaving by ourselves. And I just said, smile as we leave, and hopefully we'll get through. But the real incidence of vulnerability lies with the women and the girls. And I want you to think about the murder rate in Honduras is the highest per capita in the world. Now you think of maybe Iran, Afghanistan, I don't know, another country, right? Syria. But per capita, Honduras is the highest murder rate, most related to gang violence. In Guatemala, the violent death rates of women are 3 times the global average, which means that over 500 women are murdered annually in the country. And with an average income of $100 a month, $1,200 a year, the poverty rates in Honduras, 65% of the country live in poverty, 60% in Guatemala, and 74% in Nicaragua. So you're talking about a poor country that has even larger groups of poverty. Over 800,000 children in Guatemala work in child labor, and they have to work. That's how they support their families, whether they're in the markets, whether they're working in a shoe factory, wherever it happens to be, this is what they do to support their family. When you think of literacy, in Guatemala, in the rural areas, the average age, in the country, is 6.5 years, which is 6th grade, which is all you're required to have in Guatemala, 6th grade education. In the rural areas, it's only 4 years, and among the indigenous communities, for women that are over 15, they've only gone to school for 3 years. So the literacy rate is very low. And what does that mean? That means that a lot of times you can be manipulated by other people. And we'll talk about that a little bit. In other words, if you're in the garbage dump and they're weighing what you just brought in, glass, well, they might weigh and they'll tell you it's a different number. And if you're not literate in, in math or reading, you might be gullible to that. We did a study of 1,300 individuals or families that the programs that we work with knew of people that left to try to go to the United States. And out of these families, only 5% made it to the border. And even in those 5%, some were turned back after they did get over the border. There was a large number they never heard from, which means they might have died or they might have lost contact after they got to the United States. The problem is they're often worse off when they come back because they sold everything to get the money to be able to go, or they left a violent situation that now they're returning to. So the answer is clearly not the treacherous trip. It really is, how can we help women and girls and their families and the men to stay in their communities and be responsible and stable there? So in the last 6 years, in the countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, in our work to empower the women and girls, strengthen the families, and promote male responsibility, we've worked in 6 priority areas: basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter, domestic violence protection and legal support, housing, clean water and sanitation projects, education and economic empowerment, and health care. And I'm going to touch on just briefly each one and share a couple stories with you that were impactful to me. So the pandemic made a bad situation worse, right? I mean, it affected everybody. But what happened in Guatemala and Honduras is the countries knew, the governments knew, they had no way to be able to deal with a medical crisis of this magnitude. It's hard to deal with just the standard medical issues. Most people don't get good health care in those countries as it is. So they closed down all the public markets and they closed down all the public transportation. The problem with that is the majority of the people make their money daily in the public markets, and they need public transportation to get there. So when that was closed down, we worked with our partners and made a complete shift of our funding to make sure that we could supply food, supplies, hygienic needs for the families. And we partnered with our programs so that the kids could continue to get educated in the homes. And it was a big shift by everybody. In Nicaragua, they took a little bit of a very different tack. The government refused to acknowledge that COVID existed. We've heard that before. So we worked with a program that did public education announcements across the country. And in Central America, they stick loudspeakers on vans, okay, when they're doing political campaigns, and they run through the middle of town and very loud. Well, they did television, radio, but they also literally did loudspeakers on vans. And they said, if you need sanitary, if you need things, get yourself, but it really is a real deal. The interesting thing about that is they also they produced hundreds of sanitary stations at schools, so the kids, when they went back to school, could wash their hands. And so it's just interesting how each country tried to deal with that pandemic. And now, all three countries have been very good at getting the vaccinations. A lot of the vaccinations were the ones from Europe, which were not exactly the best ones there, but they were really all trying to get the people, like Guatemala had 100% of the people vaccinated, and they really did work hard, which was impressive. I want to talk a little bit about the legal issues. Guatemala and Honduras used to have a law that said you had to have 2 witnesses for a rape conviction. That's very hard to do, isn't it? Right. But it was part of the machismo community that made that law. That law was changed. But in Guatemala, only 3% of the cases that go to trial result in a conviction. And one of the programs we supported it paid for an attorney, a psychologist, a caseworker, and a social worker to work with the families, because there is no legal services for poor people at all. So they couldn't afford this. And in their first 100 cases, they had a 93% conviction rate, which is completely unheard of. As a result, the attorney and the director of the program received death threats, and the attorney ultimately had to find refuge in Mexico City and subsequently hired a new attorney. But that's what you deal with when you have people that are pushing against a corrupt system. I want to talk a little bit about housing, because you saw the picture. I will tell you before I go on, if we just had the music and the words to all ages, that would have been enough, right? I always think, words to all ages, in 2 minutes you could say everything that I'm going to try to say in 15, right? And but I was so helpful thankful that Olivia and Abigail were able to share kind of their experience, and you could see the pictures. So the picture of the house of Eugenia, we've known Eugenia for a number of years. We provided a scholarship to Eugenia to get her undergraduate degree in social work and her master's degree in social work. So we've known the family for a long time. She is from a Mayan community, and when she wanted to go to school, her dad disowned her, because that's not what you did in a Mayan family as a girl. You stay, and normally you have babies, right? And take care of your family. And the men go out and work in the fields, or they actually made food that they sold, and that's what he expected her to do. And so she had to leave the family, go on her own, do this journey. Very brave, right? To do this journey. Go to school, got a job, and we've been supporting her in this journey. And her husband and son, her son was very ill, and the same program that we work with her, where she works, helped her to get into a private hospital, and her son survived, but he wouldn't have survived. And so, when you wrap around this, there's the 30,000-foot level, the 10,000-foot level, and there's the 1-foot level. And I've said many times, are we going to solve all the problems in Jacksonville? No. Are we going to solve all the problems in Central America? No. But we can solve one problem, and we can advocate for bigger solving, and that's what we do. And so when she needed to find a place to build her house, her father donated a piece of his land to her. And that is what I call reconciliation, redemption, right? And about 5 months ago, her mom passed away before she was able to move into the house. And the first thing she says, Dad, you will always have a place to live with us. And that is the beauty. So here you go from being disenfranchised, your father, because you wanted to get a career, to now owning a home that your father donated the piece of property. And that experience of her with that. I would say that piece of property was a tough piece of property. It was on the side of a hill. So we had a lot of work to get that house built, but we did, and it's beautiful. I want to talk a little bit about drinking water, because we've all probably went to our tap today and had a drink of water, right? So I want you to envision a mother and her daughter or daughters waking up, walking from their house down the side of a mountain to a stream to get water or to another water source, and putting that water on top of their head. Have you ever picked up one of those 5-gallon tanks, right? Putting the water on top of their head and bringing the water back up. And then, if they really do what they're supposed to do, they'll boil that water. Doesn't always happen. And the process of getting the water, bringing the water back up, and boiling the water, and having it ready to use is about 5 hours a day. And that's what you have to do to have water. So a water project, just like a home, it is so fun, it changes the lives of people so fundamentally. It's just amazing. And so to take a village, which is one village we worked with, you saw at the very beginning of the scene, that village, they all came out to greet us, with 65 families, and we also did the school. And they have to buy 4 wells, 4 areas, because they have to own where their water sources are going to come from. In Guatemala, because of earthquakes, you have to have more than one, because an earthquake could stop the water. They own the water sources, and then we provide the materials and the engineers to help them, but they do all the work. The men, women, children, they all do the work. They put the pipes up, and they built a cistern on top of the mountain. You get electricity about 4 hours a day, but when you have gravity-fed water, you get water 24 hours a day. So they have to hire a water manager. They put the pipes up, the cistern, the pumps are electric, so you get the water going up about 4 hours a day. And then the water comes down, it's chlorinated and ready to drink. And so the smiles on the faces of the families when they turned the water on outside of each house and they had running water was incredible. So something I didn't know that my friend told me that works on water projects is that a lot of girls drop out of school if there's no water at the school. Because when they reach that age of their life, they need water for their own hygiene. And so having water in the school will help the girls to stay in school. And I didn't know that. So that was one of the things that we did. We've done water projects that have helped over 1,000 families now so far. So it's very significant in what we're doing. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about education. You saw a little bit of the picture there. I want to talk about the Women's Co-op. So we started supporting the Women's Co-op long before we started the foundation. And actually, Mrs. Weaver was a funder of that because she'd asked me, like, what are you doing going down to Central America all the time? And so I was telling her. And so I told her about the co-op. She goes, well, I'd like to help out. And when you think about recycling, we throw our stuff in the bin and it goes somewhere, right? There, it's big trucks and they back up, and depending on where you are, I call it the Guatemalan mafia, but they know where the good zones are, where the better stuff is, and so some people get those trucks, and it's a whole pecking order of which truck you get from which area the truck comes from. But there's glass, there's plastic, right? There's metal, so there's a lot of things that are recyclable. And but the other thing in Guatemala is because the sewer pipes are so small that you don't throw your toilet paper in the toilet. You throw your toilet paper in the garbage. So just imagine the health issues that you're dealing with everything that you've thrown, with toilet paper and everything else. That goes all into the garbage dump. Plus, it's on the side of a hill, and sometimes it just slides down. So what we found out with the co-op is that the women were looking for alternatives when they opened the school. They said, yeah, this is great for our kids, but what about us? And so they actually make things out of recycled materials from the garbage dump, but they also make other things. And they're learning to sew, they're learning other crafts and skills, they do jewelry, and they're making at least twice as much as if they were working in the garbage dump. And it's healthier. And they've said most of their husbands still work in the garbage dump. And they said, yeah, the one thing about that is they are stronger, and they can pull this stuff up, and they can do that. So for them, it is a job. But do I want this for my son? No. So the idea of going to school. And one woman shared with us that her daughter went to the school and just graduated as a bilingual administrator. That is a very significant job opportunity for her. And between the mom and the co-op and the daughter graduating, That's one family that's going to break that cycle of poverty. Now, it's one family. And we always say, there's 3,000 people in the garbage dump, and we got 45 women in the co-op. But there are 45 women, and we love them to death. And it's like, so we want them to make it. And if we could get 90 in, we'd get 90. They mentioned going to Casa Jackson, the hospital. I know, Len, you've been there, but so a lot of children certainly are malnourished because of extreme poverty. No question about that. Just like senior citizens, and we support a program that helps feed senior citizens, because poverty is a real thing, and a lot of times, like the senior program, it's the only meal they get that day. And so with the children, the health clinics and the hospitals either aren't there or they're not able to recognize the issues, because along with poverty, you have blockages, right? And you have allergies, and you have other reasons why the kids are not keeping the food down. So at the clinic here, they're able to identify those images, get the weight back up. And sometimes you'll see a child that's 5 years old, but they look 2 years old because of the malnutrition. And so they're able to get them back, get them stabilized, and then follow up with the families in their communities. But it's a big deal because they're literally saving lives that the system can't save through that issue. We think of AIDS and HIV. Well, in Central America, even though there are advances, a lot of times there's not access to the medicines or there's not good follow-up. And if a parent dies, often the child becomes an orphan. And we support an orphanage with 90 children from infants on up to high school. And the best thing about that is the public schools in that town have the kids come to school. And that's very, very different from a lot of the communities that these kids came in, where they weren't accepted. And the public schools accept the kids. They want them to be integrated into those schools. And although some of the infants, as you know, with proper medications, they actually can test negative for HIV after a certain period of time, all of these kids are going to be HIV positive for their lives. And so the support they're getting, the school they're getting, the education they're getting, and because they're in Guatemala City, which means that they're going to get their medicines, that's all very important for their life. So I just, wanted to share a few of those stories with you, because that's a little bit of our passion of why we do what we do. I want to show you a couple things. One of the beautiful things about the Mayan community is their weavings, and you see this one up front here, which is one example. And so there's over 25 dialects in the Mayan community. And although some people would criticize the conquering of Central America by the Spaniards and the ultimate exploitation through our banana companies of both the United States and England, it's been a rough road, right? It's been rougher for the Mayan community, but they have maintained their culture and their traditions. And even if you go to a Catholic church, they'll have a lot of indigenous, like the saints are dressed up in Mayan clothing, and they have their own indigenous saints, so they've melded their own spirituality with the Catholic spirituality. And each town, this is, a weepill is what they wear. This is actually a pillowcase, but it's made from a weepill. And this is from the town of Neiba, which was a community that many of the children in the orphanage came from, because it was a community that was wiped out. Sorry, I'm losing the microphone here. And after the war, many of the children found family members. They had just been escaping to other areas. Everybody had to escape. And when they visited the town with my colleague, they said, this is where we used to live. Now, if you can understand vegetation in the jungle area, you would have never known there was a village there that had completely grown over 4 years. But that's where they found, so many of those kids actually did find family members and were reunited. This is another community. This is just outside of Antigua, and their blouses really reflect their traditions. So one woman will know, oh, you're from this community, or you're from this community. The men do not wear the traditional wear in most communities. They wear what we would call would be like a farming outfit, cowboy hat, shirt, and pants. But this community in Santiago, it's a beautiful. Now you think this is all right. I mean, I don't think Lois Heft is here, but the needlework that is involved, as well as the weaving. They have hand looms and foot looms. This is all done. This is needlecraft, and these are birds all through Central America. And this is their style. And the men actually wear the shirt and pants in Santiago. And and then this is another one. This is actually Kelly's. And again, you see the beautiful embroidery. I'll have these downstairs. I'm just going to leave you with this story of Santiago. Santiago during the 1980s was a Mayan village, and it was caught between the warring parties of the rebels and the government. And the government came in and massacred many people in the village, as well as the Catholic priest. And so the community, and it became a national story. And as a result, the community is the only community in Guatemala that has an edict that the army is not allowed in that village because of the massacre. But the resilience of that community and the other communities is that it is still thriving. It is still moving ahead in life. They keep their traditions, they adapt to the modern era, but when you see the weavings, you see the men, you see the pride in what they have, it inspires me to say, yes, there is hope. And as the first reading, as the opening word from Margaret Mead about a small group of people, I can't think of a smaller religious group in Jacksonville than the Unitarian Universalist Church. But we're mighty. And so for our guests here, welcome to a small but mighty group, because we stand on the side of justice. And that's what really speaks to me in the work that we do in Central America. And I appreciate the time to be able to share that with you. Thank you.